Today I'd like to take you through installing Turbonomic with Terraform on an OpenShift cluster. So this assumes that you know some Terraform already, how to use Terraform. If not, there's plenty of tutorials online. Today I'd like to focus on using this module in particular and some of the dependencies within this module. So you can see the URL where you can find this module, as well as you can look to the Cloud Native Toolkit repository. There are tons of other great, useful Terraform modules there and tools that you can use as well. So a couple of the different companion modules that you're going to want to use is there's basically two things that this module for Turbonomic needs. It needs a cluster, it needs cluster information, and then it needs to know where within that cluster, what namespace would you like to actually install Turbonomic. So a couple examples of how to use this. So within your stages Terraform script, you're going to have define the cluster. Here's our information about that cluster. The cluster already exists, so we'll say that it's true. Some basic information that it needs, what version, that sort of thing. Where are you going to where's it going to find kind of the information, the resource group, the region, your API key, of course the name of the cluster, very important. And then when we get into things like the namespace, pretty straightforward here. Where do I want to actually install this? I do recommend creating the operator group within here as well for the operator. So, and the namespace module can actually do that for you, automatically, which is really nice. And then finally, we get to the actual Turbo module. Turbo module, could be pretty simple. Give it some information about the cluster, and that might be it if you're just going to use all the defaults. I'll go through what some of those defaults are in a minute. But if you do have some areas where you would like to define your own, you can override the defaults and always give it your own information as well. And we can take a look at what some of those defaults are right now. So if I look at the variables and scroll to the bottom, these will be all the Turbonomic ones that we'll use, and you can see what our defaults are. By default, we create a service account, of course, and the service account name I'm giving it is T8C operator. That's, we're doing an operator-based install, and that's just kind of a standard that we like to use. This could be anything really, but you can leave it, just as it is. More importantly, probably are the probes. Which probes would you like to install? By default, I go with these three. So we have an Instana companion module to this. There'll be a video and then as well to help you install Instana, and recommend connecting Turbonomic and Instana together. Cube Turbo helps you monitor the actual install as well, and the cluster itself. And then the OpenShift ingress, we are installing on OpenShift, so highly recommend that as well. And we'll take you through some of those. If there are other things that you would like to install, there's a number of other modules that you can list, and then that's where you would override that in your Terraform vars file, and you can tell it which modules do I actually want to install, and you can see or which probes I should say do you actually want to install. And these are some of the other probes that are supported right now. As more probes get added, by Turbonomic, I will modify this and add more and more probes, for support. If there's one that you would like that's not in there, please shoot me a note, contact me, and I'll look to add it as well. A few of the other things that we'll want to, besides the probes, we want to take a look at, and more importantly, probably, is the storage class itself. So by default, I will provision a new storage class. You could use the default, block storage if you would like to use that by default. However, if you are in a multi-zone, multi-region type of an install, then you're going to want to provision a new storage class, because there's some specifics that we need within the storage class. Basically, the big one is just to wait for the first consumer. instead of just connecting right away. That's because they're going to be in different regions. We'll need to be able to wait for the first consumer to connect, so it connects to the right persistent volume claim. So this will take care of that for you if you go ahead and say yes, provision a storage class, as well as even if you're in a single zone, single install, you can still provision a new storage class, and it shouldn't hurt at all. And then as well as provisioning, if I set this to true, this is going to be the name that it's going to create and it's going to use to create the new storage class. If I set this to false and I want to use one that's already there, then this will be the name of the class to use that already exists. So that's kind of key. So either way, this is the storage class that Turbonomic is going to use, and I'm either creating it, or I'm gonna, if I set this to false, then I'm gonna use one that already exists. So either way, and then you can see that as well in here. So in this case, I'm using a very similar one, if not the same one, but I am going with most of the defaults here. But this is where you would set it if I created like a TF-vars file. I can override any of those, and then just pass it into my module. If I don't, none of those are required, and if I don't do that, then it's just going to take everything by default, which is fine too. So you can take a look at what this looks like when it runs. If you want to look at some of the workflows in here. If I look at one of the release runs that I recently did, and I look at the deploy, you can see that it's fairly straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and do you would do this through command line. Just once you have all your variables defined, do a Terraform init. Everything gets initialized, and then you do a Terraform apply, and this will run, and you'll see that the first thing it's going to do is go through and get all the cluster information for us. That cluster module that it uses could also create a new cluster for you if you wanted to do that. In this case, I'm using one that already exists. It's going to take that information, use it for the namespace, create our namespace for us automatically. You'll see that there. And then also create, some of the other things like the operator group, like we said. And then all that information gets passed, then the output from that gets passed on to my turbo module. The operator gets created. We go through, we create the storage class, a number of other things, and then we're gonna do a deployment of this environment and add the probes, do an actual release, deploy an instance of this through the operator and the service account. So once that happens, you'll see something like this. It'll take probably a good 5 minutes that it's going to deploy. There's a number of pods that get deployed along the way. I think you'll see about 21 of them, and we'll take a look at those here shortly. But you see about 21 pods that are going to get spun up, and that will take a while. And a few of those are going to fail right away because they're dependent on other pods. So wait a good 5 minutes, and then even after that, I think it usually, from what I've seen, it's been running about 6 to 8 minutes. So 10 minutes might be safe that you can wait and take a look to see how these actually run. And then after that, everything gets created. You'll start seeing some of if you go in and you look at your module. If I go into Turbonomic, you'll see about 21 pods. So you should see the number 21 pods that are in here. 20 for the deployment and 1 for the operator. So, and while the pods are getting spun up, you'll see, like I said, a number of these will fail. A few of these, usually it's 2 or 3 that I've seen. For some reason, this one did 25 times before it successfully started up. So it can take a few minutes to start up, and like I said, probably 10 minutes should be safe, depending on the size and the amount of resources and other things you have in your cluster. One of the things you'll want to look, if you're wondering, is is it actually working or not? Look at this rsyslog pod. So a number of these other the other deployments depend on this deployment here for rsyslog. If this one is up and running, I should say if you don't even have it in the list here, then there's probably a problem. And if you don't see it in the list, then there's probably a problem. Then none of these other ones won't start up. So what you could do, a little bit of troubleshooting, is go into your deployments, look at rsyslog. It'll bring you here. Look at the YAML, and you can scroll to the bottom, and usually it'll give you an error on why it's not running. Here it is running, so it's success, and you'll see success here, successfully progressed, and that. But the other things you can do, you can look at the pods, and you can look at some of the logs and other things like that. But that's kind of a key. If the rsyslog isn't even showing up in here, then there's definitely a problem. If it is showing up in here, but it seems like it's going forever and it's not starting up, the other thing that you probably will want to look at is the storage. So if I look at my persistent volume claims, look to see that all these are bound. If they're not bound and they're in a state of waiting, then that means that usually there's some kind of a problem here. Initially, when it first gets deployed, they'll all be in a state of waiting, probably for the first 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes until they get bound. But after that, they should be bound right away. And once they're bound, then you'll start seeing the pods spin up and start up correctly. So that's pretty much it. And like I said, about close to 8 to 6, 7, 8 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, depending on your cluster, is safe before it actually starts up. But since we one of the things we did was one of the probes we created was an ingress for OpenShift. You should be able to go into networking, look at the routes, bring up the API route here, and bring that up, and you'll see something like this. So you see this screen, everything should be up and running, and here you're able to go ahead and enter in your information, username, password, create an account initially for the administrator, and then when you get in, this is where you would actually then apply your license for Turbonomic on here. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to reach out at any time. Thank you.